Today we're going to talk about
the shadows of the Pokemon universe.
This is an episode about the less often talked about paranormal side of the Pokemon world, and the lore that can be found within it. And so to start at the beginning, we must start at the end. So the question is, what happens to people in Pokemon when they die? To answer this question and many others, we actually have to start at the beginning, Generation 1. In Gen 1, you would eventually reach a place called Lavender Town. In Lavender Town, you would find Pokemon Tower, a place where deceased Pokemon were laid to rest. This was both the first introduction of a concept of Pokemon death and ghost-type Pokemon. It's also home to one of the most awesome and eerie Pokemon theme songs ever made. Duh-na-na-na. In the Pokemon Tower, you can find the graves of Pokemon long since passed. The place is fraught with what appear to be apparitions and spirits who are later revealed to be ghastly and the occasional haunter with a Sylph Scope. But that's not the important part. In Pokemon Tower was the first ever and perhaps last instance of an actual ghost of a Pokemon. In the famous battle, you faced the ghost of a Marowak blocking your path. Completely uncatchable, your only option was to defeat it or otherwise use the Pokédoll glitch to make her flee. Which brings us to our next point. How does the cycle of death and the afterlife in the Pokemon universe actually work? If we are to assume that ghost Pokemon arise from the spirits of deceased Pokemon, then why was there ever a ghost of Marowak to begin with? Perhaps only some deceased Pokemon turn into ghost Pokemon, or perhaps none at all. They just happen to be there at the place of death, perhaps doing some sort of job related to the afterlife. And what about humans? Found throughout the generations are completely in-your-face spooky instances of actual ghosts in the games. In Platinum, a little girl and an old man can be found in the old chateau, while a woman who presumably died in the snow can be found in a house on Sinnoh Route 217. In Pokemon Black and White, the ghost of a little girl can be found on Wonder Bridge. She later makes a reappearance at the Strange House in Pokemon Black and White 2. Now, just based on these few examples, we can assume that both Pokemon and humans carry souls that live on after death. But this is where it gets a little bit more complex. For instance, while it's questionable on whether any deceased Pokemon become ghost-type Pokemon when they die, there are quite a few instances of ghost Pokemon being born from human beings. According to Pokédex entries, there was once a legend of a woman who died in the snow being reborn as a Frostglass. Old tales say that Phantup are born from the spirits of children who died after being lost in the forest. Now, while these are more questionable, one Pokemon is not, Yamask. And according to an entry in Black, each of them carries a mask that used to be its face when it was human. Sometimes they look at it and cry. It doesn't get any more direct than that. Now, there are a few other Pokemon entries worth mentioning. Spirit Tome is said to be the accumulation of 108 spirits bound to a stone as punishment for misdeeds in the past. The number is based upon 108 temptations needed to reach Nirvana in Buddhism. The second would be one that directly mentions the concept of an afterlife in the Pokemon world itself. Dusknoir, Diamond and Pearl. The antenna on its head captures radio waves from the world of spirits that command it to take people there. I should note that it's also said that Dusknoir guides lost spirits back home rather than just being a straight up ticket to the afterlife. And now that we've reached it, the spirit world, mentioned in both the games and the anime, the spirit world is said to be the home of all ghost Pokemon as well as the actual ghosts of humans and Pokemon. In the anime, there is an episode called Ghoul Days in which the staff of the Pokemon Summer Academy were renovating Summit Ruins for some metal collecting competition, when they damaged a stone structure which collapsed and revealed a portal to the spirit world. A ghost girl came out of it and basically started trying to kill everyone, only to be stopped by a Dusknoir who dressed her ghost lolly ass back to whence she came. Spooky stuff. So what can we say about the paranormal in the Pokemon universe? The following are the best conclusions based on the evidence and what we know that I can come up with. When people in Pokemon die, they usually become actual spirits. Some of them move on to the spirit world, some stay behind with unfinished business, and a few completely transform through occult processes. For the most part, it seems that deceased Pokemon spirits don't actually become ghost Pokemon. They simply move on to the next life. In polarity, it seems that most ghost Pokemon come from the same spirit world, with a few exceptions such as Bannet, who is a doll that became a Pokemon over its grudge from being junked. It seeks the child who disowned it. This Pokemon is also said to be made of pure hatred. But what does all this mean? Basically, there appears to be at least 3 layers making up the paranormal Pokemon universe. The living world, the afterlife, and those stuck in between. But they are hardly separate. They are heavily interconnected with the occult basically being a part of daily life in the Pokemon world. And when you think about it, that's actually quite horrifying and pretty darn awesome.